Chapter 6 The Beginning of Sorrows. Day after day, I continued to sense impending difficulties, but one other matter still stirred in my heart. Were our Bibles being safely delivered once they arrived inside Russia? Were the Christians doing well there? Somehow, I felt I had to see for myself. I asked God to give me an opportunity to visit the Soviet Union. My heartfelt desire was to visit some of Russia's Christians. This seemed impossible because there would have to be other purposes for my trip as far as the authorities were concerned. So by invitation, I joined Brother Adrian for a group tour. I fasted and prayed for God's leadership. One of the heavy trials I always faced was the financial cost of transporting the Bibles. In spite of the difficulties, God enabled me to pay my own way and then blessed me further by allowing me to give to others. Eventually, I was forced to leave my job with the fishing department. They said a communist should have the position, so I bought some pregnant minks from some brothers in Russia. I took them home and began to raise mink to sell to the government. This furnished a good income for my family and ministry. Through this income, I was able to help many. I had many fines to pay because of foreigners who came to us and were caught. They were simply sent from the country. Then the authorities came looking for me. Sometimes I didn't even know the people. Once in the group tour in Russia, I went calling on a local Russian mayor in Chisinau, asking permission to visit some historical churches. To my satisfaction, the necessary documents were provided. Memories of Russia's Christian heritage stirred in me as I traveled from one ancient church to another. During one particular tour, I realized that I was being followed by someone, no doubt a Soviet policeman. This disturbed me because I intended to stop on my way back to my hotel to see a Christian man named George, who Brother Bernard had told me about. God help me, I prayed silently, wondering what I should do. Just then, a taxi pulled up and stopped. "Hey, mister, do you want to go somewhere?" "Yes," I answered without a thought and jumped into the cab. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't know." He looked puzzled. "Where are we going?" "Wherever God leads us." He pulled over to the right and said, "Get out, you're crazy. Where is your God?" I said, "He is on the front of the car." He said, "I don't see anything." I said, "That's all right. I can see him. Just go where I tell you to go." In a few minutes, the angel on the hood had directed me to Brother George's home. I paid the driver and rang Brother George's doorbell. Though we had never met, we thanked God for giving us the opportunity of meeting. When we had finished praying, I told George that I had come with money for needy Russian families who were to meet me at the hotel. "But first," I asked, "did the Bibles which I sent arrive safely?" "Yes," he answered, "the Bibles got through just fine, but we need many more." Then he related how a group of Christians had been forced out of Chisinau. They had been driven a distance of 30 kilometers to a deserted place with no food and no means of getting any. This hurt me deeply. I want to meet with these people. George took me to a local prayer meeting where they were already in prayer, asking God to show them where the Christians George had told me about were. We joined them in prayer, and after a time, God gave one of them a vision showing where they were. We agreed to leave right away to see if we could find them and check out the situation. We left Chisinau and arrived in the area between Chisinau and Odessa called Black Valley around 2 a.m. We verified the needs, then returned to Chisinau. That same day, we gathered clothing, food, and money to take back. Then I returned to the hotel. We had to repack our suitcases with clothing to give away. Hoping not to be detected, we left for the Black Valley early the next morning with 2 cars full of clothing. The secret police followed us and were about to overtake us. "God," we cried out in prayer, "don't let them catch us. Don't let them kill us." We thought we were as good as caught, but just then a huge black cloud came up over us. Soon it began to rain. We were driving into a slow, easy rain, but behind was a torrential downpour, hail and all. The violent cloudburst broke the police's car windshield and stopped their pursuit instantly. Because of the rain, the unpaved road became so muddy we soon had to stop our cars. We got out, picked up the suitcases, and began to walk. Suddenly we heard noises ahead of us. We froze in our tracks, not knowing who was about to appear, but a group of youngsters appeared and offered to help carry our suitcases. Certainly we had been surprised to see the youngsters coming to help us, but we were even more surprised to learn that all those faithful believers had stayed awake, awaiting our arrival. In spite of the relentless rain, their faces shone bright as the sun. An old man was about 60 years old, welcomed us. Thank God, he rejoiced. Everything he has shown me has come true. We have been praying for help, and last night as we prayed, the Holy Spirit let us know that you were coming. We were quite joyful, but best of all, the Christians of Kisenoff now knew where these people were, and someone would be able to aid them from time to time. After about an hour of warm and powerful prayer, we gave the clothing and food to Ion, the old man who had foretold our arrival. Hand it out to everyone, I instructed him, and pray that God will help me return as soon as possible. With that, we departed. On the way home, we were stopped at a police roadblock. Which one of you is Dumitrio Duduman? They demanded. I'm the one you're looking for, I answered. Come with us. Relieved that I was the only one taken, I soon found myself at the police station. The chief of police spoke good Romanian. If you came to Russia to visit, what are you doing spending your time with Christians? Don't you know better than that? I could hear others being beaten in another room. I knew I would probably be next, but the Lord gave me strength. Why are you holding me here? I asked. Take me to the president. I want to talk to him. When they heard this, they started talking to each other in Russian. What should we do with him? They asked one another. Finally, the commander ordered everyone to go home except for one officer who was to stay with me. After about an hour, I asked him in Romanian, Are you going to hold me here longer? I don't know what you are saying because I do not speak Romanian, he answered in Russian. In Russian, I answered, Are you sure you don't speak Romanian? If you don't, no problem, I speak Russian. When he heard me speak in Russian, he looked at me fearfully and went outside. I was left alone. I waited for someone else to come. As I was sitting there not knowing what to do, I heard a familiar voice. Go to the hotel. I knew it was the angel's voice, but before I left, I looked in all the rooms yelling, Where are you guys? I'm leaving. I saw no one, so I returned to the hotel. I prayed and went to sleep. In a short while, 2 policemen arrived and told me I would have to leave the next day. Later, some Christians came to check on me, but I was already gone. I couldn't sleep that night. I was concerned that I was going to miss the ones I had brought the clothes and money for. But during prayer, the voice of the Lord told me it was going to be all right, that they would be there before I had to leave. Sure enough, at about 5 a.m., I was in front of the hotel, and there was Lydia and Anna, wives of some of the pastors that had been exiled. They had the sad news that instead of their husbands being released from prison, their sentences had increased. After they left, I caught my train to Kiev. In Kiev, I went to my room and prayed that God would guide me. Lead me, Lord, protect me. I raised my hands before the Lord and said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I slept soundly until morning, but when I awoke, I couldn't get out of bed, and we were to see more sights that day. What was wrong with me? The tour guide worriedly called a doctor. When he arrived with 2 male nurses, he asked my name. I told him, Dumitrio Duduman. I noticed one of them acted a little strange when I said my name. The doctor gave me a shot and bandaged my legs, saying he would be back in 3 hours. They left and I went immediately to sleep. When the doorbell rang, I jumped out of bed. My leg didn't hurt anymore. I went to the door, and when I opened it, only the doctor was there. He said, Peace of God to you, brother. My name is Emil. I am the pastor of a Baptist church here, and God let me know I would meet you at the hotel. Putting his hand on my shoulder, he told me all the Bibles had arrived safely, and he was the one in charge of them. We prayed together, then embraced each other, and he left. I didn't know that I would ever see him again, but the next day he came and took me to visit the city and some churches. He also took me to visit some brethren who worked with Bibles and some places where churches had been destroyed. During this time, we were able to discuss how to get Bibles into Russia in greater quantities. He, being a doctor, gave us liberty to go some places without question, but he told me about the 7 churches with gold domes. That part of the Soviet Union had once belonged to Romania, and these churches were built by the Romanians. My tour guide, who spoke Romanian, was a young woman from a Christian family. I was anxious to see the loving tributes to God that had been so skillfully created by my ancestors. This land had been given to Romania when a Russian prince married a Romanian princess. The gift had included Serenity, Chisinau, Odessa, and a part of Kiev. In 1944, the Russians came in by force and took back the land they gave, and even more. Now many Romanians live in that territory, which is Moldavia. When we arrived at the first church in Kiev, my guide gave me a paper that authorized my entry. We were checked and allowed to go inside. As we entered the gate, we found ourselves in a breathtakingly lovely garden, lavish with trees and flowers. The church gleamed in the light. In front was a marker stating the church had been built by Stephen the Great in gratitude to God for 7 separate victories over the Turks in one single year. After absorbing the quiet solitude of the garden, we went into the church, but instead of seeing symbols of faith and emblems of Christ's life, death, and resurrection, to my shock and sadness, there were only pictures of communist leaders, Lenin, Stalin, Marx, and others. Once the walls of this church were covered with priceless things, memories of our ancestors, my guide quietly explained. But one day, those were taken out, and pictures of the Soviet president and members of the party were put up instead. How my heart ached when I heard this. My guide motioned with her hand. Come, I will show you a place where you might be a little happier. We made our way to the river Dnieper. On the riverbank was a statue bearing the name of John the Baptist. I was surprised. I asked Lenuda, the guide, why do the communists allow the statue to be here? She smiled. Well, they never wanted to leave it, that's for sure. A lot of people tried to destroy the statue, but everyone who tried died. Some people bombarded it with tanks, but when that didn't work either, because the shells from the tank ricocheted back at them. Lenuda pointed out the crosses around the statue. Those are the graves of those who tried to destroy the statue. Through this, God has put fear in the hearts of the enemy. Instead of destroying it, now they take care of it. Somewhat inspired, I returned to my hotel, and as I entered, I had to show my passport. The man checking my document said, I want to tell you something. You better be careful. The Romanian police have reported that you are a Christian spy. We have orders to follow you. I thanked him and shook his hand. I am a Christian too, he said softly, but don't tell anybody. In the morning, I telephoned Brother Teofil, whose number I had, and asked him to meet me in my room. When he arrived, he had another brother with him who was helping smuggle Bibles. They didn't stay long for fear of being arrested and their families being taken away. I also was trembling, so we went on our knees in prayer. As we prayed, I had a vision. I saw a great light, and in that light was a man dressed in white with a shiny belt around his waist. He was standing with his hands stretched out. He looked at me and said, Dumitru, I will suffer in your place because I am used to suffering. Look at my hands. I saw they were bleeding. A bolt of terror shot through me. I was terrified, gripped with emotion. As I gazed into the heavenly face, Don't be afraid, the voice continued. I will be with you, and you will be victorious. Then the vision ended. When we finished praying, the young man with Brother Teofil said, Brother Demetrio, don't be discouraged. I want to tell you what has happened to me. Stelica, just 24 years old, had longed in his heart to find a wife who was God's choice for him. He had fasted and prayed fervently. The next day he had written on scraps of paper the names of all the churches he knew about. Then he had drawn one. On the following Sunday he walked to the church whose name he had drawn. He talked to the pastor and asked to enter the church early, before everyone else had arrived. The pastor agreed. When he entered, he found a seat, sat down, and waited. Lord, he prayed, please let the first girl to come into the church be the one you have chosen to be my wife. Stelica sat nervously awaiting the girl's arrival. When she walked in, he was touched by the peace he saw on her face, and by the way she sang every song by heart, but she never looked his way. After the service, Stelica boldly stood up and told the congregation that he wanted the girl's hand. To his shock, she didn't turn to look at him, but the mother stood and began to tearfully speak. He learned that Mary, the lovely girl who had entered the church first, was blind. Nevertheless, Stelica had believed that Mary was God's choice for him. He asked her and her mother for her hand, and after many tears and discussion between the mother and his family and the pastor, they all agreed. So Stelica invited me to the wedding. It would take place the day before I was to leave Russia. At 9 that morning, Brother Teofil arrived to take me to the wedding. It was a day of joy, and God's presence was in our midst. A surprising number of people were there because the occasion had been publicized by the communists. A Christian was marrying a blind girl. Some were crying because of the tragic condition of the bride. I was asked to speak, and under the guidance of the Spirit of God, I spoke in faith. God is able to do a miracle here that will make our joy complete. At 11:30 a.m., the ceremony started. After my words, the pastor prayed for the couple, asking God's blessing upon the marriage. As they prayed, the bride began to speak. Her first words were, "Oh God, what a beautiful dress I am wearing. I can see what a handsome husband I have. I can see." What a marvelous moment it was when we realized that God had given her eyesight. Everyone was ecstatically thanking God for the miracle. When she was asked to pray, Mary said, "God, I thank you for this day. You were the first guest at our wedding, and you have given me the most wonderful wedding gift I could have ever imagined. Thank you for our new life. Thank you from the bottom of my heart that you have given me eyesight. Thank you for giving me such a handsome husband. Even though I was blind, he wanted to marry me. God, you have brought so much joy to me, I can never thank you enough. Dear God, never let me forget what you have done." Stelika said his love for Mary had continually grown stronger as the wedding day approached. A government cameraman who was at the wedding to take pictures ran away after the miracle happened, and no more publicity was given to the marriage. This happened in 1980. After that joyful event, I went home and found my family safe, welcoming me home with open arms. But the very next day, while I was helping Maria prepare breakfast on an outdoor stove, I saw a police car stop in front of the house. Fear pounded in my heart. I remembered the vision I'd had in Russia. Somehow, I understood from that moment on that hard times had begun. 5 officers got out of the car. One of them roughly said, "Mr. Duduman, we have some complaints against you. We understand that you are working with foreigners and with Bibles. That is why we've come to check all of your property. We have a warrant from the court." They stood Maria and me with our faces against the wall and started to check the house. They began to check at 8 a.m. and finished at 4 p.m. Virginia had been home only one day, just 8 days after giving birth to her second son, Sergio Demetrio. Her husband, Mike, and her first son, also Mike, were not home at the time. Because Virginia was ill and weak with a temperature of 100+ degrees, the police allowed her to stay in her room. Meanwhile, they ripped apart our books, pillows, closets, and clothes. They even broke Virginia's guitar in a rough attempt to search inside it. By the time they finished, the house was in total chaos. They stacked all the religious books on one table. "We'll take these with us," they said. But they did not find any Bibles. God's protection was with us. "That is my literature, and you can't take it away," I told them firmly. After checking everything in the house, they went outside and began snooping around. When I saw them going towards a bicycle, I became so worried I couldn't move a muscle, but they found nothing. Then one of the policemen was ordered to search the barn. When he headed toward the barn, my worry increased because I knew there were thousands of Bibles fitted between the rafters of the attic and covered with hay. He searched the main floor, then climbed the ladder to check the attic. But when he started to walk in the attic, it began to creak and move from all the weight in it. Not knowing the weight of the Bibles was causing the movement, he became frightened and said, "There's nothing up here. I'm not going to make this old barn collapse and kill me for no good reason." We had other hiding places around our home, which I was not concerned about. For example, to one side of our house, we had a small garden. Every year, we would plant an area of corn, especially for hiding Bibles. In the beginning, we dug large holes in the area where the corn would be planted. We then set 50-gallon plastic containers into the holes. Next, we filled each container with Bibles, put the lids on them, covered them with dirt, and planted the corn. From then on, whenever we needed to access the Bible storage, we would go out at night, dig up the corn, retrieve or add Bibles, and replant the corn. After they finished their search, they closed the report and made Virginia and me sign it. Then I walked outside with them, and they left. When I returned, I said, "I don't understand how the Bibles on the bicycle disappeared." Virginia told me she had remembered I had 3 suitcases of Bibles strapped to the bicycle behind the house. Virginia wanted to move the Bibles, but didn't want to be followed. She came into the room where we were being held and asked for permission to go to the outhouse, which was also located behind our home. They allowed her to go alone. When Virginia was behind the house, she managed to remove the heavy Bibles from the bicycle. It was with much difficulty that she managed to hide the Bibles near the river further behind the house. Because she was so weak, she would struggle 2 or 3 steps and fall. By the time she returned to the house, she was much worse, but God was with her. She made it safely back to the house without being caught by the police. Our family fell on our knees in prayer, thanking God for his deliverance. While we were praying, the angel of God appeared. I came to tell you to be strong and trust in the Lord. You will soon go through more trials, beatings, and torture. Don't be afraid. I will be with you. I will give you the victory. Just be careful that you don't reveal anything to your tormentors. Don't confess to anything, no matter what they do or ask. After he finished, there was a bright light and a loud sound. Then he vanished. I got to my feet and said to myself, God can do whatever he wants with me. How can I say no to anything he wants me to do? If God has decided I should go through trials, then so be it. I felt sure that God would eventually give me the victory, just as the angel had promised. But it wasn't easy. How I dreaded being in the hands of the police again. On the 6th of July, I woke to a great uneasiness, a heavy sadness. Although I couldn't explain my feelings of dread, they stayed with me all day. About 10 p.m., a man who worked for the police came to the door. Mr. Duduman, he said, tomorrow at 8 a.m. you have to be at the police station and report to Captain Sandrew. My deep sorrow increased. I couldn't sleep, but I chose not to tell Maria and the children what was happening. The next morning I made my way to the bus station, praying as I went. This was July 1980. I caught the bus for Sukavia. When I got there, I reported to Captain Sandrew. I was taken to a room and ordered to confess. You have been reported to have dealings with foreigners and for transporting Bibles. The policeman said that they had proof of my crimes. He began to read from a letter which they had received from a Christian, giving them every detail of my Bible smuggling activities, including what I had eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It said we had gone fishing, had given him fried fish to take home, and a jar of jam for his wife. Perhaps most tragically of all, Brother Deig's name was included in the letter. They asked about every Christian author of literature they had wanted to confiscate. Because you are a Christian, you have to tell us the truth. They asked how Bibles were transported, what Christian foreigners I knew, and what meetings I had attended. But as far as my responses were concerned, I might as well have been deaf and dumb. When they observed my silence, they began kicking me, spitting in my face, beating me. If you are a Christian, why don't you ask your God to save you from our hands, from the hands of the devil? They jeered. After they beat me until I was unconscious, they threw cold water on me and then started beating me again. For 5 months, this agony continued. It seemed to me that those days would never end. They would torture me for days, to the point of death, then send me home to recuperate. As soon as I was able to function somewhat reasonably, they would arrest me again and repeat the cycle. My family and I were desperate, but by His grace I kept my promise to God, and His Holy Spirit let me know that I would surely be victorious. During one of my times at home, I made the difficult decision to confront Pop Livu, the man who had written the letter about me and the missionaries. When I arrived at his house in Cluj, he was defenseless. He didn't know what to say to me or how to get rid of me. Do you realize what you have done? I cornered him with frustrating questions. Do you see what the devil has made of you? Aren't you afraid of the day when you will be asked by God why you did this? The day will come when you will have to answer for all the terrible things you have done. While I was talking, Livu's son-in-law walked through the door. I heard God's whisper in my ear, "Get out of here as fast as you can." I rose quickly and rushed out. I had to walk about 5 kilometers to the train station. While the train was approaching the city of Sukava, where I had to catch the bus, the angel of the Lord spoke to me and told me not to get off at Sukava. The police are waiting for you. Be alert, because the Lord will protect you in a way you don't think possible. I thanked the Lord and decided to stop at the station past Sukava in Bukea. When we passed Sukava, I saw 3 policemen standing on the platform. How tragic it would have been for me to have been arrested without my family's knowledge. I rode another half hour to Veresti, where I had to change trains. When I started to get off, I felt a hand pull me back. Suddenly, the train I needed to board moved alongside, and I was able to get on without being seen. After about 20 minutes, the train stopped for a light. "Get off here," I heard the Lord direct me. "The police are at the station." I got off. At that moment, the train started again. I walked home through the cornfields, unseen. It was wet because it had rained, but finally I got home. When I arrived, I found Maria in tears. "I was worried sick about you, because ever since you left, the police have been here looking for you. Worse than that, police officers are stationed at our neighbors' houses, watching for you. Maria, we just have to trust God. We will be victorious, and we need to thank God for all He does for us." I ate dinner and went to bed. It grew late, but I couldn't sleep. Our dog kept barking angrily, and I knew from the sound of his bark that someone was snooping around. Someone was searching for me right outside our house.